And we are back on the 0 hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Before we continue, another reminder that we pre-record this show on Thursdays, so the entire political universe may have changed by the time you hear these words. I think it's likely that Joe Biden will be declared president or well on his way, and the Senate will either be unresolved or most likely leaning Republican. But of course, if that's changed between now and then, consider this show a time capsule from your immediate past. Joining us now is, we always look forward to talking with him, Professor Richard Wolff is an economist. He is the host of Economic Update every Tuesday evening on Free Speech TV, where the show also appears. And his latest book is The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Protect Us from Pandemics or Itself. Without any further ado, Richard Wolff, thank you for coming back on the program.
Thank you, Richard. I'm glad to be here.
Well, as always, of course, we're glad to have you. And, it's impossible for me anyway, I'm sure other people have different takes. It's impossible for me to look at this election as anything else but the augury of a failing, if not failed, system. It seems to me that this is an explosion of intense voter emotion. What was the old Groucho song? Whatever it is, I'm against it. And to me, seems to suggest that the future will hold very little in the way of real relief for American people who are dying or American people who are struggling to resist or overcome disease. But am I being too negative?
No, I think that while there are some signs of things that could be getting better, in general, I think you'd have to say that this is a depressing election result. No matter who finally ends up where, this is an election that means that half, roughly, of the American people do not find in Donald Trump and the Republicans a reason to vote against them. On the contrary, seem to like and to be enthusiastic about voting for them. That's an amazing achievement for a president presiding over the second worst collapse of capitalism in the history of the system, presiding over the worst failure of maintenance of public health that we've probably had in the history of the United States. A person who behaves the way he does, given all of that you can retain half the votes, indicates a population that is really disconnected from what used to be the notion of politics, the notion that you're choosing a direction for the nation to go into, and I haven't the faintest idea what the direction is in any real sense of Mr. Trump. I don't think he does. I know that he's on the right-wing edge of things, but beyond that, which is really not a lot, there isn't a clear direction, and there isn't with Mr. Biden either. Other than the fact that he's not Trump, which seems to have been the core of his campaign, there's very little there to get anyone excited. They had an exciting candidate in Mr. Sanders. They got rid of him. And indeed, Biden congratulated himself a few times during the campaign that he had defeated Bernie Sanders. The Democrats strike me as a party that is rooted in a fundamental contradiction that they don't face up to, that they pretend often isn't there, but which hobbles them, and hobbled them in 2016. It's hobbled them again now. It is hobbling them over the long run. But they insist that it's okay to remain oblivious. And let me be clear what it is. The economic system of this country divides us into two groups: a very small one, which are called employers, and a very large one, which are called employees. Uh, the Republican Party has always been and is today a party of the employers. It serves their interest, it promotes their interest, and it fights against the improvement of the conditions of employees. They're against raising the minimum wage. They're against providing worker protections in the law, and on and on and on and on, all of which is well known. So when they go hand in hand to corporate donors, they get a lot of money because the corporations understand that they are a good party for them. They then mobilize as many employees as they can, and that's the major job of the Republican Party, is to mobilize enough employees to get the seats in the Congress and the state houses to do for the corporations and the rich what the Republican Party is there to do. And so they become the advocates of having guns in your home, or against abortion, or all of the issues that can mobilize portions and bits and pieces of the employee class. So now let's contrast the Democrats. The Democrats, like the Republicans, go to corporations and rich people and ask for donations, which they get because the corporations and the rich people want to cover their bets. They want to make sure that if the Democrats get in there, they will have some say, some influence, and not be frozen out. So they give money. Now, what does the Democratic Party do? Well, traditionally, it's the party of the employees. It is the party that represents the worker, and the Republicans are representing the employer. But you can't, if you're a Democrat, wear these two hats. You can't get money from the corporations and then go champion what the employees want, because most of what they want will come out of the pockets of the employers. They want better wages. They want better working conditions. They want to pay a lower share of the government's taxes. They want more tax-funded public services. Everything they want is either a burden or a cost or a tax on the employer who doesn't want it. In other words, you've got the fundamental conflict of capitalism. And the Democrats have resolved that problem in two different ways. During the collapse of capitalism in the 1930s, the Democratic Party forced its own leader, Franklin Roosevelt, to become indeed a champion of the employee class. That's why we got Social Security, unemployment compensation, minimum wage law, government hiring of millions of people. All were firsts in American history. The working class, the employees got something, and they got the corporations to be paying a large part of that bill with higher taxes, and ditto for rich people. Once the war was over in 1945, and the Depression was over, and Franklin Roosevelt, the president, had died, the business community went to work to undo, to reverse, to kill the New Deal, all those achievements. And they've done a pretty good job over the last 70 years doing exactly that. But it plunges the Democrats into a contradiction. Are you going to defend what was achieved in the 30s and 40s? Or are you going to let it die? And the Democratic Party made a decision. And that's why the old progressive types are not heard of anymore, and the new center of the Democratic Party, the Clintons, the Obamas, they took over because the decision was made: we're going to go for the donations from the corporations, and we're going to soft pedal the championing of the working class, which is why year after year, and this started back in the 80s and 90s, year after year, group after group of working class employee families feel betrayed by the Democratic Party, feel as though its promises and its commitments aren't being honored, weren't being honored, aren't being achieved. And so they lose interest in the Democratic Party, they lose loyalty, and they become open to the blandishments of the Republicans, or they lose interest in voting altogether. And the Democratic Party ends up with the Clinton race in 2016, now with the Biden race, scratching its head. But there is no mystery. You would be able to win if you were the champion of the employees, because that's the largest single group in this society. It dwarfs in size every other. And if you were the champion, if that was your goal, if that was your priority, if that's what you focused on, you would be able to mobilize big electoral victories. And let me conclude, Richard, by giving you an example, even from this election. I'm just going to pick two. In Florida, which went for Trump, they also voted to raise the minimum wage. In other words, when you put before the people the notion, should you pay workers $15 an hour rather than the miserable pay you give them now, the kind of majority of people looked at each other and voted for that. Let me give you a second example. In Portland, Maine, a coalition that included the Democratic Socialists of America, a Southern Maine branch, together with a progressive alliance of local groups in Portland, Maine, and Portland, Maine is one of the biggest cities in Maine, they decided to put forward half a dozen ballot initiatives which were on the ballot. And they included a number of radical sorts of things: rent control to help tenants relative to landlords, a requirement that during an emergency such as the pandemic, all workers are paid time and a half because they have extraordinary needs. Oh, how interesting an idea. Rent control, I may have mentioned. All kinds of interesting, progressive things. Okay, here's what happened. The business community mobilized and spent $650,000 roughly to defeat these initiatives. The Socialists and the Progressive Alliance, they raised $46,000, much, much less. And obviously, I wouldn't be telling you this story if the following didn't happen. The Socialists and Progressives won 5 out of the 6 propositions they put forward. They defeated the business community, and they defeated people who spent 15 times more money than they did to defeat them. This suggests something to me, that namely, you would do better if you had the courage to fight for the people who are what you claim your constituency is. You once did that, and I want to remind everyone of a little history lesson. Roosevelt, who's the president who pushed through Social Security, unemployment compensation, the first minimum wage bill in the history of America, and hired 15 million unemployed people. That president was reelected 3 times. He was and remains by far the most popular president this country has ever had. That was the one who went furthest in the direction of the Democratic Party being the champion of the employee class. The lesson is clear. There really is an option for the Democratic Party, but they've chosen a route that does bring them a good bit of money from the corporations. No question, I cannot deny it. But it brings them electoral results of the sort we're watching now.
I think that's right. And again, we're talking with economist Richard Wolff. I certainly agree with you, Richard Wolff. And I'm just bracing myself for the commentary that says because whatever happens in an election in this country, the commentary is, well, we live in a center right country. And, I keep using this analogy, but there are two foods I hate: liver and beets. If all you're going to offer me is liver and beets, I guess I'll take the liver because it's got a little more nutrition, but I am not a liver eating person. I'm just eating in the wrong restaurant if that's all they got. So, that commentary is going to come up. But what it seems to me, and I really love your thoughts about this, Richard Wolff, what it seems to me is that in the absence of a coherent program from the Democrats, on behalf of the employees, as you put it, that what we're left with is an insincere sounding and complex agenda that largely appeals to the professional managerial class on the Democratic side. And as for the Republicans, this astonishing number of people, communities especially hard hit by COVID, going more for Trump this time than last time, for example. What I keep thinking about is the Marxist educator Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, who talked about internalizing the oppressor consciousness, that if there's no coherent worldview or frame of reference being offered to you on one side, then the other side may represent your own oppression, perhaps even your own death, but it's a coherent worldview people can absorb, and it's like, well, that's something. And obviously I'm struggling with the results of this election like everyone else, but do you think that sort of Freire pedagogy of the oppressed interpretation applies at all here, as I do?
Yes, I would phrase it, I think, a little bit differently, but I think that's going on here. I don't think that Mr. Trump, for example, has a coherent policy on almost anything. That's not who he is. It's not what he's ever done. He's a real estate hustler. He wants to sell the building or sell the apartment or rent the house. And the name of the game is to figure out, when you're dealing with a prospective buyer, what can you say in the next few minutes or hours to that buyer to get him or her to buy the piece of real estate. You will say anything. They don't have the time or the resources to question or investigate 3/4 of what you say. So you will try to psych out who they are, what matters to them, and then say what you think they want to hear in terms of doing what you want them to do. And so that's what he's taken that into the political arena. And he delivers a set of images, assertions. It doesn't matter. The press likes to find that he's told a lie. This isn't interesting. First of all the politicians do it, a good bit of it. Yes, he does it more. Yes, he does it more egregiously. But he does present a kind of endless political theater. Morning, noon, and night, there's a new tweet coming out, something outrageous, something attention-grabbing. Look at me, listen to me, let me try to throw at you something that'll make you do what I want you to do. It's not so much it's a coherent narrative, but it is something that is engaging, like a TV show or something like that, that holds your attention for enough time that the advertiser can run their product by you. Let me put it a different way, because this is the issue, again, with the Democratic Party. They're hesitant to be extreme, as they would call it, as champions of the working class or the employee class. And so they're not. They're moderate. Mr. Biden is a moderate. Kamala Harris is a moderate, on and on and on. But Mr. Trump is not a moderate. He is an extremist. The earlier Republican candidates also cultivated evangelical Christians, talked about abortion, did a little bit about abortion, but they weren't ready to go whole hog on this abortion issue. But Mr. Trump is, even though in his earlier life he crystal clearly could care less about abortion or religion or any of it. He gives them he takes an extreme position to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Coney Barrett. That's an extreme change of direction. He does what he does in extreme. And not only does it work, is it not center right? It is extreme right with promise to become more extreme right. And the Republican Party collapses all around him. I don't believe there's any reason why the same thing would not have happened to the Democratic Party had they gone with Bernie Sanders, were they to go with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, etc. What they would suffer, and there's no question, is an atrophy, a drying up of their corporate donations and of their donations from the people who are wealthy by virtue of their links to corporations. But on the other hand, they would then get mass support, and that includes small donations from many, many people. Bernie has proven that that's a viable strategy. It may not get you enough money, but as I mentioned in the case of Portland, Maine, and other cases as well, you can offset the monetary advantage with the advantage of people, of numbers. And the employee champion is in a good position to accomplish that offset.
So here's, and again, we're talking with economist Richard Wolff, obviously about the election, but so here's what I well, one of the many things I struggle with right now is this. First of all, in terms of the arc of history going forward, any belief that Joe Biden was going to come into office with a powerful congressional majority and be inspired to become the new FDR and inject massive amounts of spending into the economy, create jobs, healthcare. I mean, there was no indication of that, but any thought that might happen, that he might be inspired to do that, I think can be effectively considered null and void. I mean, obviously, let me know if you disagree, but so we're not going to get, as far as I can tell, any deep or meaningful stimulus action or address the healthcare problem, the unemployment problem, the many other problems plaguing Americans. I assume the economy is going to continue to take a tough hit. Even regular unemployment benefits are going to run out for a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I imagine they'll do what it takes to rescue the stock market if they can. But here we are now with a trajectory of no major relief in sight. I don't see an immediate scenario for this country and by inference for the world that is not pretty damn disastrous. Again, am I being too pessimistic?
No, but I think we have to confront folks like you and me the disconnect between how we see what's going on and how the folks see it who run the two political parties. For them, there is no crisis of capitalism, and the reason you know that is neither one of them said there was such a thing. They didn't propose solutions because they don't see the problem. For Mr. Trump, the economy was doing great before the virus hit. That's crazy, but that's what he believes. And that's what the people he talks to believe. There is a statistic out that 40% of the electorate voted overwhelmingly for Mr. Trump believes that the economy is in a good or excellent condition. I mean, that is an amazing statement. All I can tell you is nobody I know, professional economist, right-winger, left-winger, or in the center, would use the words good or excellent to describe the American economy today. Right. My left-wing and right-wing colleagues and centrist colleagues, we don't agree on how we got into the current situation, and we don't agree on how to get out of it. But here's what we all agree on. This is the worst condition of the American economy in our lifetimes. But that's not what they think, neither Biden nor Trump. So they don't come up with a solution for capitalism. The stock market has gone crazy once it became clear, starting Tuesday, that this was going to be a close race and with an end result of a likely divided government, that the Democrats were not, in fact, going to have a blue wave or anything like that. And why is the stock market going up? Because only had the Democrats won everything was there even a chance, and that's all it was, that there would be some rollback of the tax cut given to corporations and the rich in that legislation of December 2017. Only with a blue-dominated situation would there have been some progressive legislation, a large stimulus program, one that bailed out cities and states who are desperate now because of cut in their revenues due to the depression, et cetera, et cetera. So the stock market says, oh, great, we're not going to have to pay. They were willing, by the way. Wall Street gave money to the Democrats, lots of it. So they were willing to pay some taxes to have some of that tax cut reversed. They know that's necessary. They know it was absurd to have gotten such a large tax cut after 30 years in which they had gotten record profits and all the rest. They knew all of that. But nonetheless, they're happy now that they're not going to have any kind of interference. We're going to go back to where things were, as Mr. Biden said, back to normal, as if normal wasn't the road we were on when we hit this disaster. Yes, I think you're right. We're not going to see any kind of behavior from neither the Republicans nor the Democrats that recognizes that this society is in a fundamental crisis. It still believes that all of the problems it faces are somehow manageable, solutions can be found, or the problem can be postponed. And let me give you just two examples of how that's going to come back and haunt us. The Chinese economy, the economy of the People's Republic of China, is simply outmaneuvering us, and it has been doing that for 25 years, and it's going to continue to do that. And the United States' ability to stop it is somewhere between nothing and zero. And that's what's been demonstrated. The frustration of the United States will continue to build until one or another leader, and believe me, it could be equally from either party, does something irrevocable and really bad and really stupid, and then we're going to be in the soup. But there's no solution that either of them has come up with. When Joe Biden refers to the leader of China as a thug, what does he think he's doing? What kind of from Trump we expect it, but from Mr. Biden, that's it? You're going to call them names? It's childish. It's the sign of a society that, in fact, without knowing it, has given up. Let me give you a second example. In California, the election was also about a proposition. I believe it was Proposition 22 in California. And it was a proposition heavily promoted by Uber, Lyft, and other companies like that. And it was designed to allow them, as a referendum, to allow them to refer and deal with their employees. And there are huge numbers of Uber, Lyft drivers, et cetera, around the country. It allows these companies, and by the way, this passed, so the companies got what they want.
I know.
The reports are $200 million was spent by them to win this referendum in California. It allows them to deal with their workers as if they weren't workers, as if they were gig contractors. In other words, people with whom they signed a business contract, not people whom they employed as employees. Why was $200 million spent on this? Because the profits of Uber and Lyft have nothing to do with technology or any of the other hype that their PR dishes out. They make money because they can get away doing things to their workers that nobody else can do. Why? Because everybody else who has employees is required to follow the law. We have laws in this country built up over the last 200 years that are called worker protection laws. You have to provide a bathroom for a worker. You can't employ children. You cannot requires sexual services as part of the job. You must pay overtime if it's more than 40 hours. You must make sure the air is clean, etc., etc., etc. These are requirements, and they're expensive for employers. Employers fought against every single one of them. Those had to be fought for by the working class. They won them. What Uber and Lyft achieved is the eradication of 150 to 200 years of labor struggle and labor history. They now can treat their workers without observing the law, because the law was all about employees, and they've gotten the word changed. You're not my employee, you're my independent contractor. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like you can now commit murder by referring to the victim as not a person, but as, I don't know, an alien or maybe a caterpillar, or come up with some other word, and then you've defeated the whole point of the legislation by playing this legal game. They have now established this. This is going to make the other 49 states targets for the same thing to be done there. And it's going to make many, many service workers find themselves soon reclassified as gig workers, whereupon they can work 80 hours a week because no one is forcing them to. You see, it's their individual decision. I'm trying to mock the language that is used this through.
And I have to just say, Richard Wolff, that I grew up on labor history that, for example, highlighted the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory as one of the horrors of life before workplace protections. But now the women who worked in that shirtwaist factory did piece work without proper safety or protection. They're gig workers. I mean, I feel as if we've gone back to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory days, that we're just saying, well, they're entrepreneurs. They're, my only other comment, then we can wrap up, but my only other comment is that just as you pointed out that Florida voted for Donald Trump, but to raise the minimum wage, California voted overwhelmingly for Joe Biden, but also voted to strip these workers or make sure these workers never get their rights as workers. So I guess we're a nation of contradictions on both sides of the aisle.
Yes, we are. But I would warn everyone that I don't want to lose your important point from a few moments ago, Richard. This is a ratcheting down of the wages and the standards of living of the American working class. It's a much more important blow in that direction than any other outcome, certainly any choice between candidate A and candidate B that was on the ballot. This is a sign, if you need it, as is the rising competitive power of the People's Republic of China. These are problems that aren't going away. These are issues that are going to confront this country. And they were barely referenced in this election campaign, with the exception of the desperate frustration revealed in a candidate like Biden running for office, who's going to have to deal with the problem of the People's Republic of China, thinking he was accomplishing something significant by calling him names. It is a sign of a disconnect between the real problems of our system and a political apparatus, two major parties that have monopolized our politics and take it light years away from what the issues are.
Well, and in closing, all I can say is to repeat the words of Joe Hill, don't mourn, organize. And Richard Wolff, economist, author, his newest book is The Sickness is the System. His program is Economic Update. As always, Richard Wolff, thanks for your thoughts, and thanks so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Richard, and my appreciation, as so many others, for the work you do in the program that you produce.
Thank you. And we'll be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.